laid with spoken.
The Becoming of Cernunnos
By Dana Birkmour. Digital narration, performed by multiple digital voices.
Chapter 1. The Song of the Sickle. Carwyn swung his sickle with practiced ease, and the bronze sang as it cut cleanly through the stalks of barley. The sickle's elegant curve bore the distinct characteristics of his grandfather's craftsmanship. It had been one of the last things forged with his own hands, before the stiffening of his joints forced him to cede the work to Cernunnos, Carwyn's younger brother. Carwyn paused mid-swing, listening to the sounds of the harvest. The song of the sickle rang true, a high and clean note as the blades cut the air. It was a good sound, a sound the land recognized, a sound that honored both the harvest goddess and the sun god. Down the rows of grain, the voices of his people rose in the harvest chant, as compelling as it was rhythmic and familiar. He raised his voice to join the harmony as he continued his part in the harvest, before pausing again to straighten and wipe sweat from his brow. The sun was low, lighting the western sky with gold. Its light gilded the ripe grain and set the edges of the sacred groves behind the fields ablaze in warm light. The air smelled of cut stalks and the tang of dew rising from the riverbank. Behind him, he heard footsteps approaching.
"You've kept that edge good and true this season, lad."
Bran, his father, the chief said, stopping beside him. Bran rested his hand on his son's shoulder. His forearms were sun-darkened and ringed with old scars, just as a good warrior's should be. The longest scar, a pale crescent running nearly from thumb to elbow, marked where a raider's sword had bitten deep during Carwyn's first taste of clan warfare 5 harvests ago. That battle had salted the valley's borders with enough enemy blood to keep their northern neighbors too cowed to raid them again since. Bran continued, and his words dragged Carwyn's thoughts back out of the past.
"Your grandfather would be proud of that, if his knees would let him out here to help with the harvest still, that is. He's always saying a sickle remembers the hand that tends it."
Carwyn nodded, his sun-bleached copper braids slipping over one shoulder.
"I know, father. Leave the blade ragged, and the harvest answers in kind." "I've heard him."
He made a wry face, and finished with,
"Once or twice."
Bran laughed.
"Ha, ha, ha, and now you sound exactly as I did to my father. Some truths are meant to be harvested again each season by each generation, it seems."
At 20 harvests of age, Carwyn's arms bore the lean strength of a man who'd grown from boyhood, swinging sickles and hauling sheaves as much as practicing with sword and stave. He let his gaze drift to the ridge.
"It sings well when it cuts, and when the sickles sing,"
he said, acknowledging the well-known truth.
"the gods are listening."
Father and son stood in silence together for a moment more, breathing in the cool dusk air. From here they could see the entire valley, the round houses nestled among vegetable gardens, the river bending like a fine silver bracelet through the meadows, the rising dark of the eastern woods, and the smoke on the horizon from the strange new foreign tribe settlement to the southeast. The sight coiled in Carwyn's gut. Wrong. Where only meadow and forest had stretched since his first memories, these newcomers had built their strange square houses.
"Yeah,"
Bran said, as his calloused hand gripped his son's shoulder tighter for a moment, turning him slightly more to the south as he pointed to the horizon. Carwyn followed the line of his arm. The new plume of smoke was now unmistakable against the evening sky.
"Another half?"
he asked, the words tasting bitter even as he spoke them.
"Another whole settlement again by next moon's turning, no doubt."
Bran's words fell with the cold weight of winter rain.
"They build fast, and every moon there's more of them arriving, it seems."
The old warrior's jaw worked before he huffed in frustration, and added the true warning.
"Those square houses. It's unnatural. The land and gods won't stand for it much longer. Mark my words. Fancy putting corners on the land like that, all sharp angle defying the land's curves. It just isn't right."
But although his words were certain and confident, the tone he spoke them in sounded deeply troubled.
"They'll move on,"
Carwyn said reassuringly to his father.
"The land won't embrace them."
Bran didn't answer immediately, but something in the set of his jaw said he didn't feel this was something they should count on after all.
"The deer said the same of the wolf. It will pass, and the meadow will still be mine. until one winter the wolf's dens dotted every hill, and the deer's bones bleached in the grasses between them,
he said eventually. There was a beat of silence. Somewhere in the distance, an actual wolf howled, and neither man could say whether it was in warning or agreement. A rustle came from behind them. It was not followed by the measured tread of an elder, but the skip and scramble of someone who never walked a straight path when life always had so many interesting detours to offer. Carwyn didn't need to turn around to know it was Tarnis. His brother had always moved like this, half lad, half bird, all restless energy barely contained within his skin. Even at 18 harvests, he still looked like a youth. Tarnis's shoulders had yet to fill out as completely as Carwyn's had, though lately, as he had begun to spend more and more of his day working the hammer and bellows, under the strict supervision of their grandfather, his arms had begun to feature more of the corded muscle of lean strength, and his hands were already well calloused from working bronze. Now those hands fluttered as he skidded to a stop, breathless.
I saw them!
His voice cracked between excitement and dread, the way it still did when he'd stayed up too late telling stories by the embers.
Down in the low hollow where the blackberries grow. They've brought carts with wooden rings that roll like nothing I've ever seen. Not like our sledges that drag, and not like the log rollers we use for shifting the heaviest loads either. These!
He spread his arms wide, nearly clipping Carwyn's shoulder.
These turn as if the ground itself carries them. It's incredible!
The older brother caught Tarnis's wrist, not to scold, but to steady and focus. The younger's pulse thrummed like a trapped sparrow's beneath his fingers.
One had a beast pulling it.
Tarnis continued, quieter now.
Shorter horned and smaller than our herds, but its shoulders were wrapped in strange hides, like it was wearing armor for battle.
Bran grunted.
Wheels. Nothing new there. Old invention, but not one of much use in the long term. Looks all grand and fancy until they're getting stuck every other moment. Then you find they're not worth the bother, and go back to a sturdy sled. Still, every now and again some young thinker gets all excited about it again for a while, and tries to make them work, before letting the idea go.
Tarnis's eyes were bright with something Carwyn couldn't name. Curiosity, perhaps, or a strange type of hunger.
They're not like us,
Tarnis said, almost to himself.
They don't sing to the fields. They bite into the earth with those grey metal teeth, and drag its secrets out by the roots. But they work them fast, so fast.
Bran spat into the dirt.
Leave their ways to rot in the sun, with barley to cut and gratitude to show to the harvest mother.
He jerked his chin toward the offering baskets waiting by the boundary stone.
The mother gave. We return. That's the way of things.
Tarnis lingered a moment longer before following. His fingers twitched, as if already testing the feel of a wheel's rim. Carwyn looked back once more at the curling smoke in the southeast. Let them come, he thought. Let their iron clatter and these round wooden discs turn. Bronze was shaped with reverence, fire, and the names of gods whispered into molten rivers. This land remembers the hands and hearts that honor her, and she will know the ones that did not. Chapter 2. Metal Without Prayer. The iron came in silence, not like the hush of snowfall, but like the dead air between thunderclaps. Not in raiding bands or firelit clashes, but in the soft, dull thunk of blades biting into sacred trees, without chant, without offering, and without pause, just the thock of those grey metal blades biting into sacred bark. The grove was not far from their tribal boundary. It was also where the watchers laid wreaths each solstice and whispered the names of the ancestors into the moss. Carwyn had gone to collect willow bark for his grandfather's aching joints from the banks of the river nearby, when he saw the strangers in the sacred alder grove. 6 of them, 5 with axes of that lusterless, hard grey metal, and 1 with a board and stylus, noting trees like tallied beads at market. That stylus moved like a beetle carving tracks in bark, recording something, as if the grove could be measured in strokes instead of songs. No one sang as they cut. No libation was poured to the soil of the grove. There was just the thunking of the iron axes, and between thunks, silence. He stood watching in quiet horror from within the undergrowth, still as a stone. When the first tree fell, it was an elm tree planted in ceremony and nourished with the bones of his ancestors. He felt the earth beneath his feet groan. The sacred grove shuddered, and Carwyn with it. His breath locked in his throat as he held himself back from brash, unsanctioned violence against the 6 interloping newcomers. His fingers found the haft of his knife. The handle of it was made from a branch taken in ceremony from that very same tree. It now felt warm as a fresh wound. Gritting his teeth, he watched from the shadows a little longer, then quietly backed away from the grove. When Carwyn returned to his people around twilight, Bran was sharpening a blade, bronze, clean-edged, curved, glowing with the warm inner light of the fire they had forged it.
They've crossed,
Carwyn said.
and they're taking trees.
Bram's hand did not pause.
How far? Which trees?
To the grove of listening boundary trees. They're by the river, near the spot where Talon's tooth was knocked out when she was learning to use a bow and didn't pay mind to the recoil.
Bran set the blade down.
And the gods?
Carwyn said nothing, because before he could answer, his brother Tarnis pushed in through the roundhouse door and rushed over to them. He was flushed, muddy, his cloak torn by brambles.
They aren't evil or cruel,
He said, before anyone asked.
just fast. They don't see the way we do.
Bran's voice cracked like struck flint, and he had no question about who his youngest son meant by them in the circumstances.
You've been speaking to them.
Tarnis nodded.
To one of them. He leads their trade. He offered salt and a fascinating new type of cloth. The dyes they've been using are amazing. He's learned some of our language, but not enough for me to understand how he'd made it exactly, although he tried to explain.
Tarnis, focus, the land. What are they doing cutting down the trees? Do you know what's happened to the trees of the Whispering Boundary Grove?
Cut in Carwyn.
Oh, they did what? I didn't know about that.
Tarnis's eyes widened, genuine surprise flashing across his face.
The man I spoke with, Aldrich is his name, he never mentioned cutting trees in the sacred groves. He just said they're looking for lands that aren't being used. Fallow fields, meadows without herds.
And you believed him?
Bran's voice cut like a new forged bronze blade.
Did you tell him which groves were sacred? Which trees hold the bones of our ancestors? Which streams carry our prayers?
Tarnis faltered.
I didn't think I needed to. He seemed to understand boundaries. He was happy to keep away from the areas we need for grazing and planting. They want peace, Father.
Peace,
Carwyn echoed, the word hollow as a dried gourd.
while their axes sing in our groves without offering, while they carve paths through our sacred spaces without permission.
Salt.
Bran repeated, as if the word were a worm in his meal.
They season their tongues before they swallow our land. Do you not see the pattern, boy? First they enter, then they observe, then they take what seems unguarded. The boundary trees are just the beginning.
Tarnis shook his head vehemently.
You don't understand what drives them here. Aldrich showed me marks on his skin, burns and scars from battles where their homes were destroyed. His people fled something terrible. Their all villages burned, their sacred places were desecrated. They've had to leave the land of their own ancestors, the land they came from. They just need a home.
And so they'll take ours.
Carwyn asked quietly.
2 by tree, grove by grove.
We could speak with them.
Tarnis insisted.
Explain about the sacred trees, about the offerings, about the proper ways to ask permission from the land.
They'll find no peaceful trading here, with their axes in our groves.
Bran slammed his fist against the hearthstone.
First come the traders, sniffing about, talking about peaceful opportunity. Then it's the warriors, and they're still talking of opportunity, but it's not peaceful anymore. Always the same ending.
They don't want war.
Tarnis said, his voice dropping lower, and into a stubborn register Carwyn knew well since childhood.
Aldrich's people have seen enough bloodshed. The children among them still wake screaming from nightmares. They're tired, Father. Tired and looking for somewhere to belong.
We have ground.
Bran growled.
Ground that answers, ground that remembers, ground that has held our bones and drunk our blood for generations uncounted. Would you have us surrender it to strangers who cannot hear its voice?
Tarnis fell silent, but Carwyn heard something concerning in his brother's voice when he had spoken of these strangers. Wonder and his ever-present, irrepressible curiosity. There was more his brother wasn't saying. Something about these newcomers had captured his imagination in a way that went beyond mere diplomacy.
They don't want war.
Tarnis said again.
Only a place to live their lives. Only somewhere new to settle. They've had to leave the land of their own ancestors. the land they came from, and they need a home.
We have ground.
Bran growled.
Ground that answers us. Ground that remembers us.
But Carwyn heard something concerning in his brother's voice, wonder, and his ever-present, irrepressible curiosity. That night, the fire in the hearthstone cracked, long after the singing had ceased. Carwyn sat alone, bronze sickle across his knees, thinking of the sound the elder tree had made when it died. It had not screamed, it had sighed, just as grandmother had when the fever took her, as if some things accepted dying without a fight. Chapter 3. Where Bronze Will Break. Bran called the war council together to meet beneath the hill of stones. The moon hung low and swollen over the ancient mound. It was a dome of earth and stone, raised by hands so long dead now that even their names had been forgotten. Only their work remained, this perfect half-sphere of packed soil and river rock, crowned with 9 standing stones arranged like teeth in an open jaw. The tribe had met here in times of danger, since well before Carwyn's grandfather's grandfather was born. No torches were lit, only the moon watched, silver-eyed and silent. Elders sat in the inner circle, weathered faces half lost in shadow. When they spoke, their remaining teeth gleamed like fragments of bone on an old battlefield in the dim light. Their breath smelled of last winter's stored apples, just slightly sour. Between them moved the keeper of memory, old Morriga, her spine curved like a bow, her fingers perpetually stained with the juices of herbs and berries. She carried the tribe's most sacred possession, a pouch of deerskin so ancient that the hide had gone translucent in places, revealing glimpses of the treasures within. 7 generations of wisdom keepers had worn that pouch against their hearts, adding to its contents only in the direst moments of tribal history. At the center lay a cloth of woven flax, weighted with a shard of obsidian, a sprig of yew, and a loop of twisted bronze, symbols of the tribe's promise, blood and memory. The obsidian, black as a starless night, had come from the mountains to the far west. It had been carried by Bran's great-grandmother when she fled a flood that drowned the village. The yew, freshly cut this morning, represented the continuity of life, even as it served as a reminder of death's inevitable arrival. And the bronze loop had been the first successful casting by the tribe's metalsmith, 10 generations past. Each item anchored the tribe to their identity, even as they faced an uncertain future. As chief, Bran spoke first.
They have crossed a sacred line. Trees have been felled. Tracks carved into the groves.
A hum of ascent, grim and low. Elder Nessa, her face a map of wrinkles and wisdom, cleared her throat.
The gods have been patient with us,
she said.
But even patience has its limits. Perhaps they test us now. Test us to see if we can remember how to stand firm when the wind blows hard and cold.
Or perhaps, said Keth, a hunter whose leg had never fully healed from a stag's goring 3 summers past.
The gods have already abandoned us to these iron wielders. What if they found these newcomers more worthy of favor?
The suggestion sent a ripple of discomfort through the gathering. Bran's jaw tightened visibly. Carwyn said nothing. His hands were empty as he sat in his place behind the elders, but his thoughts were not. He found himself watching the shadows between the standing stones surrounding them, noticing how they seemed to lengthen and shrink with each breath of wind. The land was listening. The land was always listening. But what would it hear tonight? Courage or fear? Wisdom or folly? He couldn't say. But something in him stirred. Not quite awake, but no longer fully dormant either. Like a seed sensing the first warmth of spring while still buried beneath winter's last frost.
Ritual combat,
someone said.
Send a challenge.
Old Morriga shook her head, the bone beads in her white hair clicking together.
I have consulted the signs in water, smoke, and stone. These people do not walk the path of honor as we know it. They understand strength, but not sacrifice. Wealth, but not worth.
That cannot be,
objected one of the younger warriors. Essa, her dark hair cropped short in mourning for a child lost to fever in the winter just past.
All people understand honor. It may wear different faces, speak in different tongues, but it must exist.
Not all faces are true ones,
countered Keth.
And not all tongues speak without forking. They'll laugh. I tell you, these grove cutters won't honor sacred jewels.
Bran nodded grimly.
I sent Darrick to observe their camp 3 days past. He watched them settle disputes. It was not with ritual or combat, but with marks on clay tablets and raised voices. They value their written records above witnessed words. Their leaders wear no scars of honor, bear no tokens of courage proven.
Then let's show them strength. A warning. Burn their carts.
A murmur of approval followed this suggestion, but Carwyn noticed how his father's expression darkened further.
And what then?
Bran asked.
When they rebuild, return with more men. When they seek vengeance for property destroyed rather than honor the warning for what it is.
He shook his head.
No. Half measures will be worse than nothing. It will only feed their anger and justification without serving our need for justice either. And a warning,
he said, as his eyes raked across the seated warriors of the tribe.
Only has value if it comes with teeth enough to truly make it noticed.
Carwyn saw Tarnis's fingers twitch down toward his own unmarked arms. He bore no warrior's scars yet. Bran's eyes tracked the movement too, and Carwyn's lips thinned as he saw how his brother flinched under their father's scrutiny. Tarnis had always been more drawn to the forge than the field, and more skilled with craft than combat. It wasn't cowardice, but came from a genuine love of creation over destruction. He could spend hours perfecting the curve of a blade, debating the precise mixture of tin and copper needed for the strongest bronze. But he had never shown eagerness to blood that bronze in battle.
Father,
Tarnis said suddenly, interjecting into the debate of the elders.
Their metalworking. It's unlike anything we've seen. The grey metal they use. The iron. It's so much stronger than our bronze. Much, much stronger.
A heavy silence followed this interruption. Elder Nessa leaned forward.
Explain, young man.
Tarnis swallowed.
I traded one of Grandfather's small knives for one of theirs. Tested them against each other.
His voice faltered.
Our bronze, it notched. Deeply. Their blade was barely scratched.
Bran's face went still as stone.
And you think this metal will count for more than our skill in battle? Our connection to the land beneath us?
I don't question our courage or skill in battle,
Tarnis admitted.
But if we fight them, our weapons may not hold.
Carwyn looked to Tarnis, seated at the outer ring. His brother's eyes were shadowed.
What would you have us do?
Carwyn asked him quietly. Tarnis looked up, startled.
They do not understand what they've done, cutting the older grove. Not fully. They're working through their own experiences in the land they're fleeing, and the tribes they fled from. If we attack, we confirm every fear they carry, and we may never have the chance to negotiate with them in peace for a shared future. And if we cannot share the future, well, we may not be the ones who win.
Carwyn considered his younger brother's words, and spoke before their father could tear down Tarnis's arguments in front of the tribe.
Are you telling us we may be looking at a choice of a shared future, or no future for our tribe at all?
Perhaps,
he said.
The fear they carry is that all strangers are enemies, that this new land offers only death, that they will never find home again.
He hesitated.
Aldrich's daughter, she draws pictures of their journey here, of people falling behind, of storms too fierce to shelter from, of hunger so deep it hollowed their cheeks.
His voice softened.
They've lost much to be here.
And now we may lose much because they are here.
Bran countered.
Does their suffering make our own any less real? If we do not,
Bran said,
we let them forget there were gods here at all.
Elder Nessa stirred again, her gnarled fingers working the worn prayer cord that never left her wrist.
Both of you speak truth,
she acknowledged.
But incomplete truth is like half-fired clay. It looks solid until the rains come.
She fixed her clouded eyes on Bran.
What if we tried one more approach? Send an embassy, not of warriors, but of wisdom keepers. Show them our ways before we show them our wrath.
Bran's expression remained stone-hard.
And if they refuse to see? If they continue to fell the sacred trees, to carve their paths through our memories?
Then at least,
she said,
the gods will know we exhausted every path before choosing blood.
The circle fell silent, considering. The moon had risen higher now, casting the gathered faces in stark relief. In that moment, Carwyn felt the weight of decision hanging in the air like mist before a storm breaks. The council ended with no clear path but one: prepare for anything. Warriors would paint their faces, spears would be blessed, bronze would sing for battle. But first, 3 days' grace. 3 days for Nessa and 2 other elders to approach the strangers' settlement, to attempt to make them understand what they had violated. 3 days for the tribe to ready themselves for peace if possible, but for war if necessary. The next morning, Carwyn stood with others in the shallows of the eastern brook, dipping weapons in the running water. Each warrior moved with ceremonial precision, speaking the names of their weapons as the water accepted them.
Tooth of the mountain,
murmured Neve as she lowered her spear.
Remembers the blood,
whispered Keth as his axe touched the stream. Carwyn held his own blade. It was a sword long enough to match his height that his grandfather had forged for him. But he hesitated. Unlike the other warriors, he had never named his weapon. It had drawn blood, yes, but had never seemed to thirst for more.
Have you found its name yet?
Asked Neve, noticing his hesitation. Carwyn looked at the bronze gleaming beneath the clear water.
I don't know,
he admitted.
It's always been just a tool.
Keth grunted.
A blade without a name fights without a soul, lad. You know that. Give it purpose, or it will falter when most needed.
Carwyn nodded, but still no name came to his lips. The sword remained silent in his hands as he completed the ritual. Late as usual, Tarnis's figure appeared on the ridge above the stream.
I tried to speak for us,
he said to Carwyn, as he approached with his own bronze sword ready to cleanse and consecrate.
Told them the land is sacred. They asked what god owns it, so they might build an altar to him elsewhere in replacement.
Tarnis said.
As if asking what mind it is that runs my body, as if the two, the grove and the god, are separate things. I don't know how we can reach a clear understanding in time to head off this conflict,
he said, his voice tight with anxiety. His face was drawn, smudged with ash, and what looked suspiciously like dried tears.
I went to their camp before dawn,
he explained, seeing Carwyn's questioning look.
Thought I might speak to Aldrich alone, before the elders arrived.
Carwyn felt a spike of concern of his own at that.
That was dangerous. If Father knew.
Father would have stopped me.
Tarnis finished.
And nothing would have been gained.
He ran a hand through his hair, leaving a new streak of soot.
I showed Aldrich the stump of the alder tree, tried to explain how it had been planted when grandmother's grandmother was a child, how it carried our memories, how the ancestors' bones nourish its roots.
And?
Prompted Carwyn when his brother fell silent.
He apologized,
Tarnis said with a bitter laugh.
Said they would plant 2 trees for every one they cut, again, as if trees were merely things to be counted and replaced, interchangeable.
His voice caught.
Then he asked again what god's territory they had trespassed on, so they could make proper offerings of apology.
The other warriors had paused in their rituals, listening now. Carwyn turned.
And what did you say?
That's when I said no god owns the land. The land is the god.
The words hung in the misty air like a very self-evident revelation. The other warriors nearby exchanged glances, some confused, some approving. This was not precisely the way they usually spoke about their gods, and yet it felt true, profoundly true.
That was well said.
Essa murmured, surprise evident in her tone. She had always dismissed Tarnis as too lost in his own world of thoughts for practical tribal matters, like understanding the gods. Tarnis shook his head.
Well said, perhaps, but not well understood or received. Aldrich looked at me as if he had forgotten every word he'd known of our language just yesterday.
He kicked at a stone, sending it skipping across the brook's surface.
They divide everything. Land from sky, tree from soul, spirit from matter, gods from land. It seems they cannot see the whole thing at once, even when you point them at it.
Carwyn exhaled. Tarnis continued.
But one of them, a girl. She listened.
Carwyn raised an eyebrow.
A child.
No,
Tarnis said.
A young woman, Aldrich's daughter, Lyrian. She makes their records, draws their maps.
Something in his voice shifted, softened.
While her father dismissed my words as not making sense, and kept asking the wrong silly questions over and over again, like he couldn't understand the answers, She watched me, tried to ask a few questions herself, about how we speak to the land, about our offerings.
He glanced away.
She has eyes like still pools, the kind that reflect everything and hide depths beneath.
Keth spat into the water.
Pretty eyes won't stop their axes, boy.
No,
Tarnis agreed.
but understanding might. She promised to speak with the others, to try to explain what I couldn't make clear.
A single voice, against many.
Essa said, though not unkindly.
It rarely carries far, and you should know that better than most, Tarnis.
Tarnis's shoulders slumped.
I know, but I had to try something.
He looked at his brother.
Carwyn, what if...
The sound of a horn cut through the morning mist, 3 long notes. The signal from the watchers. Elder Nessa's embassy had returned. From their expressions, the news was not good. That night, as warriors set their hands to spear and shield, Carwyn walked alone into the remains of the grove, where the trees of memory had fallen. He kneeled beside the stumps, placed his palm against the torn heartwood, as he closed his eyes and let his thoughts reach out. The air in the grove hung heavier now, as if the very atmosphere struggled beneath the weight of violation. Carwyn closed his eyes, trying to feel what remained of the elder tree's presence. For generations, his people had come here to commune with the ancestors, to whisper prayers into the bark that would carry their words to the other world. Now that connection lay severed. That channel between worlds was gone. Except, it wasn't entirely absent. As his palm rested against the rough wood, he felt a faint resonance. Not the strong pulse of living tree flesh, but something more subtle. An echo. A memory.
I should have done more than just watched.
He whispered to the stump.
I shouldn't have waited for permission to act, shouldn't have held back. I should have protected you.
No answer came. At least, not in words. But the evening breeze stirred, bringing with it the scent of loam and leaf mold, the rich perfume of decomposition and renewal. Even in death, the elder tree was returning to the cycle. Even broken, it remained part of the greater whole. The stars wheeled above. Carwyn remained kneeling until his legs grew numb and his back ached. The moon rose, casting silver light through the canopy above, dappling the forest floor with luminous patches. In one such pool of light, something moved, a small green shoot, pushing up beside the stump. Alive, persistent. He reached out with one finger, gently touching the tender stem.
You're early,
he murmured.
It's not yet your season.
The green shoot trembled under his touch. From the direction of his village, voices carried the pre-battle songs beginning. By now, Nessa would have delivered her report. The strangers remained unmoved. Perhaps some regret had been expressed for the felled trees, but not enough to change anything. Not enough to restore what was lost. The vote must have been cast for confrontation. Tomorrow, bronze would meet iron. And somewhere in the dark, something older than language turned its face toward him. A beetle scuttled over the severed rings of the tree's life, and it made Carwyn wonder how it was that the gods counted time. The seasons of a man were brief compared to the seasons this tree had seen before falling to the iron axe, yet it was also rising again. The new tree emerging from the shoot at the base of the stump would not carry the rings of those seasons past, yet it was the same tree in so many other ways. The beetle, iridescent, with a shell like the polished obsidian of the tribe's sacred objects, pulsed in its journey across the stump. Its antennae waved, seeming to taste the air around Carwyn. Then, with deliberate precision, it turned and crawled directly toward his still outstretched finger. He remained motionless as the small creature climbed onto his skin, its tiny feet tickling as it moved across his knuckles.
What can you tell me of the mind, of the gods, little bug?
He whispered. The beetle paused at the invitation, antennae working furiously. Then it began to circle once, twice, 3 times before becoming still again. The same pattern the tribe walked during naming ceremonies. The pattern of recognition, identification. A chill that had nothing to do with the night air traced Carwyn's spine. He had been taught since childhood that the small creatures of the forest were the eyes and ears of the old powers, the unnamed forces that had shaped the land long before humans walked upon it. To receive the attention of such a messenger was rare. The gods had not forgotten them. They were waiting to be remembered themselves. The beetle spread its wing casings and took flight, a brief droning arc through the moonlight before vanishing into the shadows beyond the clearing. Carwyn remained kneeling, his heart beating a strange rhythm against his ribs. Slowly, he rose to his feet. His body felt different, somehow lighter, yet more connected to the earth beneath, as if invisible threads had woven themselves between his bones and the roots below, binding him to the land in ways he couldn't yet understand. The songs from the settlement had grown louder. Warriors were preparing for battle, offering prayers to ancestors whose names they knew, to gods whose favor they sought. Carwyn listened, but found himself still unable to join in with them. The words they spoke no longer felt like his to speak. Instead, he turned toward the deepest part of the forest, turned to where the oldest trees still stood, where few ever walked. Something was calling him, not with sound, but with silence. He took one step, then another, and the dense underbrush of the forest opened before him, moonlight illuminating a path where none had been visible before. Behind him lay the world of men and bronze and iron and blood, soon to be spilled. Ahead lay something older, something more enduring. And Carwyn, son of Bran, brother of Cernunnos, found himself walking a boundary that wasn't marked by any tree or stone or river or map. He walked the line between what was and what would be, between human rules and customs and something else. Chapter 4. The Still Pool. The forest had swallowed Carwyn whole. He had walked through the night, following a path that existed more in sensation than sight. Luminous fungi marked his way, glowing with a pale blue light that pulsed gently, like the heartbeats of sleeping creatures. The normal sounds of the woodland, the hoot of owls, the rustle of night creatures, had fallen away miles back, replaced by a profound silence that felt expectant, as if the entire forest held its breath. As dawn silvered the sky, a white stag burst from the undergrowth beside him and disappeared into a thick patch of mist ahead. Carwyn stood looking at where it had disappeared, watching the tendrils of mist curling like the breath of the forest itself. Dew seeped through his wool cloak, cold as a burial shroud. Carwyn stepped gently between the stones, wrapped in his cloak of undyed wool. He carried no offering, held no chant on his lips. Chants and offerings belonged to the world of ritual. What he sought here now seemed to lie beyond that. Even so, he had never come to a sacred place so empty-handed before. And this place was most assuredly sacred. Even a child knew that one always approached the gods with gifts, honey cakes for the spring rites, blood drops for the winter turning, woven circlets of grain for the harvest blessing. One did not come before the divine with empty palms. Yet something had guided him differently this time, a wordless certainty that rose from his bones rather than his thoughts. The gods needed no trinkets from him today. They needed something else entirely. As he stepped empty-handed into the mist, he came to a moss-covered boulder, slick with dew. He kneeled, placing both palms against the stone. It was cold at first, but something was reaching out from beneath the moss and lichen covering its surface, an echo of shape, of memory, of listening. In the mists around him, patterns emerged, concentric circles at first, like the life rings of the fallen memory trees. But they seemed to shift when viewed directly, morphing into whirls and spirals that put him in mind of the flow of rivers and the movement of the winds, stabilizing only for brief moments in his peripheral vision. He reached out, his fingertips attempting to trace these patterns, but they splintered into motes of light and shadow in the air before him, and he lay his hands back on the moss-covered boulder before him. But as his eyes traced their path, a strange sensation rose through his hands, a tingling that was neither pain nor pleasure, but something more elemental, like the shock of cold spring water on fever-hot skin.
My father is right, but so is my brother.
He whispered into the swirling mists.
I cannot see the path our land needs us to take. I cannot see how to hold on to what matters. As father knows we must, without resisting in a way that seems futile, doomed, and unnecessary. The way Cernunnos says fighting these iron wielders will be.
He pressed his forehead against the cold stone, shoulders slumping with the weight of impossible choices. as the mist curled around him like a living thing responding to his despair.
What can I do? What can I be that will serve this need of my land, of my gods?
The words emerged unbidden, yet they felt like the most natural utterance he had ever made. Not a prayer in the way his people understood prayer. Not a request, nor a bargain. It was a statement of willingness. Something in the stone seemed to pulse in response. The sensation travelled up his arms and settled in his chest, a weight that was simultaneously burden and blessing. The mist deepened and darkened, and the air thickened with stillness. No bird song, no rustle of small things. The grove held its breath. The world contracted around Carwyn until there was nothing beyond the circle of stones, nothing beyond the touch of his hands on the boulder. The boundaries between his flesh and the rock began to blur, not physically but in some deeper sense, as if the cells of his body recognized their kinship with the bones of the earth, both made of the same essential elements, both born from the same soil, both destined to return to it. A ripple passed through the ground, a vibration from far below the surface, where the oldest roots of the oldest trees drank from underground streams. The ripple reached the boulder and passed into Carwyn's palms, then up his arms and into his chest. The mist swirling grew more frenzied, thickening until he could no longer even see the stone before him as more than a vague blur. The world dissolved, reformed, dissolved again. He was no longer kneeling. He stood now in a different grove. The trees here were vast, their trunks too wide to encircle, their crowns vanished into endless canopy. The ground pulsed faintly beneath his feet. In the distance water shimmered, a still pool, perfectly round, its surface undisturbed. The pool's depths flickered with shadows of swords, skulls, and spoons, gifts swallowed by generations. This was not the familiar forest of his hunting trips. These were not oaks, elms, or beeches that he could name. These trees belonged to no species known to his people. Their bark spiraled in patterns that made his eyes water if he looked too long. Their leaves, what he could glimpse of them far overhead, shifted between colors that he could not name. And yet, despite their utter strangeness, they felt more familiar than the trees he'd grown up alongside. As if these were the original templates from which all mundane trees had been derived, the pure, perfect forms that existed before the world became what it was. The pool drew his attention. Its perfect circularity could not have been natural, yet he saw no evidence of human craft in its making. No tool marks on stone, no built edge. It was as if the water had decided upon its own boundaries and the earth had simply acquiesced. The objects in its depths, did they move? Each time he shifted his gaze, they seemed to be in slightly different arrangements. Among the shadows of ancient offerings, he thought he glimpsed his grandfather's bronze sickle, his father's oldest hunting knife, the bone comb his mother had worn in her hair until fever took her. How could these things be here? Some had been buried with their owners, others still existed in the world of men, yet here they were, or rather, here with their essences, their meanings, their souls. He moved toward it, though he did not recall choosing to walk, and paused at the water's edge. The surface stilled to mirror-like clarity. At first, he saw only his own reflection, familiar face, dark bronze hair, and the uncertain expression of a man caught between duties. But as he watched, the image rippled and changed. His reflection aged before his eyes, laugh lines deepening around his mouth. Hair first streaked with grey, then became solid silver. A future self stood beside a hearth fire, surrounded by children, then grandchildren. When the vision stilled, it showed him white-haired, teaching a young boy how to sharpen a blade by the hearth in an evening. An honoured elder of a tribe, respected and whole. But then the water darkened. The reflection shifted again, first showing him his present reflection, but then antlers sprouted from his brow, their branches twisting like living wood. His eyes grew darker, deeper, reflecting starlight though no stars shone above. His form part man and part beast, alone at the forest's edge, watching human settlements from shadows, set apart, solitary. Feared, perhaps, but powerful beyond mortal reckoning. A guardian of sacred groves, protector of sacred boundaries, and the memory of what was being forgotten. Two futures, two paths. One of belonging but perhaps ultimate failure. One of exile but enduring purpose. Carwyn stared at the transformed reflection as understanding washed over him. Just as the truth began to settle in him, the pool stirred again. A new image surfaced, sharp, sudden, and achingly real. He saw his father and brother locked in battle, backs pressed together against the circle of advancing warriors. They fought not for conquest, but to protect something behind them. Perhaps their kin, perhaps the last remnant of their home. And then, a blur of movement, an axe arcing through the smoke-filled air. His father, unaware. Carwyn stepped forward instinctively, a cry rising in his throat. In the vision he reached them just in time, his hand catching the haft of the axe, his body interposing, saving his father, turning the tide. The vision held, trembling like a bubble between worlds. A future where he stayed, fought, belonged. His knees buckled. He pressed both palms hard against the ground, panting as though the air had turned to ash. What if I could do both? He thought. What if I could be brother, son, and guardian? But the pool stilled, the image vanished, not in anger but in certainty. And in the silence that followed, Carwyn understood the finality of fate. The warm, bright, human path was no longer his to walk. Perhaps it never had been. Tears slipped down his cheeks as he straightened once more, looking not into the water now, but beyond it. Then, with quiet certainty, he stepped forward and plunged his hands into the pool.
I choose.
In a moment of commitment, he plunged his hands into the pool, breaking the smooth surface.
I choose.
The words disappeared into the mist as he spoke them, but they left him as a covenant. As the cold water closed around his wrists, he felt the first shoots of antler pushing through skin at his temples. With each sharp thrust of growth, he felt threads snapping, connections to the future he might have lived, to hearth fires and children's laughter, to a place among elders, to belonging. Each severed tie ached more deeply than the physical pain of transformation. He was trading the known warmth of human communion for something vast and solitary, stepping beyond the boundary of what his people could understand or accept. Yet he surrendered to it with the calm certainty of one who recognizes a calling and accepts. A shift occurred in the atmosphere. It is clarification, as if a veil had been partially lifted, and the silver surface of the pool darkened again. Carwyn saw flashes of iron blades, felled groves, his brother's face lit by firelight. He saw himself, older, faceless, watching from trees, not intervening, witnessing, guarding. The visions came not as separate images, but as a continuous flow of potential. It was like watching water move over stones, each moment connected to the next, forming a narrative that was not fixed but fluid. These were not prophecies of what must be, but glimpses of what might become. In one flash, he saw Tarnis standing between warriors of both tribes, arms outstretched, face determined. In another, his brother bent over unfamiliar tools, working metal of grey instead of bronze, his expression intent but troubled. Carwyn saw settlements expanding, trees falling, new growths emerging in patterns directed by human hands rather than natural processes. And throughout it all, he saw a presence at the edges, sometimes stag, sometimes man, sometimes neither, watching, remembering, ensuring that even as the human world transformed the land, something of the land's original nature remained intact.
I don't understand,
he said to the mists that still writhed around him. But even as the words left him, understanding did begin to dawn. Not complete, not yet coherent, but a glimmer of comprehension about what had been offered and what would be required in return.
I am not to fight,
he acknowledged.
Not as they do, not with bronze, nor any blade, but I am to become what they cannot unmake.
Then darkness descended over him, a sense of dissolution, complete and terrifying, identity unraveled, memory scattered, consciousness dispersed, followed by reconstruction. But not as before. Something had been added, something had changed. Something that had always been potential within him was now awakened and integrated. He woke, gasping, soaked in dew. Alone. The colors of dawn were not merely beautiful but meaningful. Each hue, a word in a language he was beginning to understand. The movement of wind through leaves was not random, but patterned. Messages passed from one living thing to another in continuous discourse. The very soil beneath him hummed with presence. Millions upon millions of lives, from bacteria to worms to the tangled networks of fungal threads, all engaged in constant vital conversation. And he could hear it now, not with ears, with everything. His skin steamed faintly in the morning chill. Around him, the grove was still, but watching. The trees leaned in, the roots breathed. The cuffs on his wrists, once copper, now shimmered with a dull, green patina, as if something old and verdant had claimed them. The cuffs clung tighter too, as if his wrists had grown into them, even as he would surrender his place in the human world, son, brother, warrior, man. In return, he would become legend, story, memory, and a link between worlds. Worlds of what was, what might have been, and what was to be. Chapter 5. Between brothers. The sun was rising when Carwyn returned. The grove clung to him still, mist on his skin, the weight of vision coiled behind his eyes. His feet touched earth, but some part of him no longer walked quite as a man, though he no longer bore the antlers of the night before. The others sensed it. They stepped back without knowing why. Something about him drew all eyes now. The line of his shoulders seemed broader, his movements looser and more fluid, as though strength and grace had woven together in his body in a whole new way. The air carried his scent, wild, green, and sharp as pine resin, and it set nerves jangling with instinctive reactions. Even when he stood silent, presence radiated from him in a way that was half warning, half invitation, and all power. When his gaze flickered across them, the warrior's ochre paint seemed to flicker like bloodstains, then faded back to its ritually prescribed patterns. The gathered tribesfolk started to feel that his gaze lingered too long, too steady, and it left skin prickling as though touched. A few of the younger women lowered their eyes quickly, as if ashamed to be caught staring. One man's breath stuttered in his throat before he turned away. Only Bran met his gaze, and even then his fingers flexed unconsciously against the hilt of his blade.
You have been to one of the old places, my son,
Bran said. Carwyn nodded.
And you have come back, changed.
I came back,
Carwyn said, refusing to acknowledge the question his father was asking. Bran circled him slowly, eyes mirrored.
What power have you brought us?
He asked, his voice now eager.
What weapon from the old places? What magic to turn their iron back against them?
Carwyn felt a pang of regret at disappointing his father. The chief was looking for an advantage in the coming conflict, a supernatural edge to sharpen their bronze against the stranger's grey metal.
I bring no weapon,
Carwyn said sadly but resolutely.
That is not what the forest offered.
Bran's expression hardened with disappointment. He looked suddenly older, the lines around his eyes deepening as he ran a hand through his greying hair.
Then what use was your journey? What purpose in communing with the old ones, if not to strengthen our arm against those who would take our land?
There was real pain in his voice. Carwyn saw then what he hadn't fully appreciated before, the terrible weight his father carried. Not just leadership, but the responsibility of maintaining continuity in a time when everything familiar was being threatened. He was a man raised to protect and defend one world, suddenly finding himself in another.
The strength of our arm is not what will preserve what matters,
Carwyn replied, feeling the weight of his new knowledge pressing against the back of his tongue, like words in the language he was still learning.
I was shown another future.
His father's face darkened.
We have no need of riddles or mysteries, boy. We are going into battle. We need clear paths and sharp edges.
Carwyn shook his head slowly.
That is exactly what we do not need. Not now. Not for what is coming.
Bran's mouth tightened, but he said nothing, and his knuckles whitened on his blade as he turned away from Carwyn. For the first time, Carwyn saw fear in his father's eyes, not of iron or invaders, but of the son who'd returned wrong. Around them, the warriors continued their rites, painting their faces and their bronze weapons with ochre. No one else drew close, except Cernunnos. He approached slowly, hands empty, eyes wary.
You've seen something important.
Yes.
Cernunnos glanced around.
Then tell them not to go. Tell them this isn't the way. It can't be. It will doom us in the long term, even if we survive today's battle.
They won't listen to me today,
Carwyn said.
They aren't any more ready to hear what I have to tell them than they are to listen to you. Not yet.
Downslope. Bronze clanged as those of the tribe taking part in the raid donned their armor. A chant for courage was starting from the assembling warriors. In the village behind, a baby wailed as mothers of the younger children and infants fetched water to boil and laid out bandages for the wounded who would return.
Then what will you do?
Tarnis demanded.
Let our people bleed and die for their foolish pride? For the ghosts of trees already fallen?
Carwyn looked at his brother, truly looked, and saw the crack forming. Not betrayal, but division. They had always walked the same path, until now.
I won't stop them,
Carwyn said.
They must choose. But I will not walk into battle with them. My place is now between the people and the land. A watcher, a witness.
Tarnis swallowed.
You sound like a ghost already,
he whispered.
And I'm left with men who think winning is the same as surviving the day.
They stood in silence. In that space between words, Carwyn felt the weight of what would come, the clash of bronze and iron, and the cries of men who thought they could preserve with the power of destruction. Freeze time in the present by looking only to the past. Turn the future aside by turning their eyes away from it. Bran called for the warriors. Carwyn did not follow. He turned instead toward the woods, and the trees parted for him. Behind him, his people went to war. Had the wild waited. And in the roots and branches, in the hollow places of the land, something began to awaken. Not new, but remembered. Something that bore antlers, and silence, and green. Something that would not forget. Something that breathed in the roots of the felled elder trees of the grove of memory. Chapter 6. Retribution's Flame. Night descended on the village like the shrouds already laid out over the two fallen warriors. Carwyn sat alone at the forest edge, watching the fires of his people burn low. Their warriors had returned, fewer than had left, carrying their wounded and dragging their two dead on a travois. His father had returned victorious, but victory felt more like the ominous threat of an uncertain future than an achievement. The raid had accomplished little beyond bloodshed, and the village felt it. He listened to the sounds of mourning that drifted through the darkness. Quiet sobs, murmured prayers to ancestors. The living tended the wounded with herbs and poultices, while the dead were prepared for their journey to the other world. In the darkness, Carwyn's fingers traced patterns in the soil, feeling the pulse of the earth beneath. The forest behind him whispered, restless.
You should have been there,
Tarnis said, approaching where Carwyn sat in the shadows. The light of the village would have rendered him as a dark silhouette to normal eyes, but with his new vision, Carwyn could see that his brother's face was still streaked with dried blood and ochre, and that his eyes were hollow with exhaustion.
And what would that have changed?
Carwyn asked. Tarnis sank down beside him.
I don't know. This was not a fight that is possible to win in any real way. But I do know it would have felt better to have my brother beside me.
They sat in silence, watching the village breathe its collective grief.
Something is coming,
Carwyn said suddenly, his voice altered. The air around them had changed, grown dense with warning. The forest at his back shuddered. Before Tarnis could respond, the first cries broke the night.
Strangers! I am wielders!
Carwyn was on his feet, the vision clear before him. Retribution had come swiftly on the heels of their raid. The settlers had tracked them back to their village, waiting only for darkness to bring their vengeance. He ran toward the chaos, Tarnis close behind. The settlement blazed with torchlight and terror as iron-bearing strangers poured from the forest edge opposite their position. They carried fury in their hands, blades and torches held high. Bran stood in the center of the village, rallying those warriors still able to fight. His voice thundered above the panic, directing the defense. Carwyn moved toward him, but a tide of battle surged between them. Near the granary mound, a settler staggered into view. Young, face streaked with soot and grief, dragging a makeshift torch. Pitch clung to the cloth wrap head, flame licking greedily at the air. His eyes were wide, unfocused. Someone he loved had fallen that day, it seemed. Or perhaps he had simply forgotten how to stop. Carwyn saw the trajectory. The torch aimed at the granary that held their winter stores. Without it, Starvation would claim more lives than any blade. The settler drew back his arm, ready to cast the flame. Without conscious thought, Carwyn reached. Not with his hands, but with something deeper. Something the grove had awakened. He felt the earth respond, roots stirring, vines creeping forth with unnatural speed. They erupted from the ground, wrapping around the settler's legs, climbing his torso, seizing the arm that held destruction. The torch fell harmlessly to the earth where Carwyn extinguished it with a thought. Pain lanced through him, sudden and terrible. His own right arm now hung strangely. His skin had split like bark and was weeping a thick, golden red sap that glistened like amber. He knew it was the price of interference, of taking sides in the battle he was not meant to be fighting. Through the haze of pain, he saw his father engaged with 3 iron wielders. Bran fought like the warrior he had always been, fierce, proud, unwavering. He cut down 2 before the 3rd drove iron deep into his chest.
Father!
Tarnis's cry tore from his throat, raw and primal, as he raced towards the clan chief. Bran's eyes found his son's across the chaos, and recognition flickered there. Not of Carwyn as he had been, but as he now was. Something like understanding passed between them, and then Bran fell. The battle raged on, but something had shifted. The villages fought with renewed desperation, driving the settlers back. The raiders, having accomplished much of their revenge, began to retreat into the darkness. Carwyn knelt beside his father's body, cradling his head. No words passed between them. Bran was already gone, his spirit fleeing to join the ancestors. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the earth in a way that Carwyn could now feel the earth drinking it in.
I'm sorry,
he whispered, closing his father's eyes. His wounded arm pulsed, vine-like patterns etching themselves deeper into his flesh. The sap had hardened slightly, forming a protective shell over the worst of the damage. His body was changing, adapting to what he had become. Tarnis appeared beside him, his arm also wounded, but with a ragged sword slash that dripped warm red blood as he stared at his brother's transformed arm with a mixture of awe.
What have you become?
He whispered. Carwyn had no answer. He only knew that there was no going back. The village continued to burn around them. Chapter 7. The Threshold. When dawn came, the village smelled of ash. The air tasted of metal and char, each breath coating the tongue like a blade fresh from the forge. No birds sang. There was only the creak of buildings still smouldering as they collapsed, the occasional thud of a falling acorn, like a lost infant's heartbeat, from the old oak that still stood behind the grain storage. Smoke coiled from the still glowing roots of a second ancient oak that had stood beside the roundhouse. In the churned and blood-soaked soil, bent bronze blades were scattered like shed skin. The warriors of Bran's tribe had risen from their blankets to meet them as best they could, and neither side had left untouched. Carwyn stood at the edge of the carnage, not within, as from the far side of the ruin, Tarnis emerged. His wounded arm was bound, blood seeping through cloth. His eyes met Carwyn's and held his gaze with a mix of accusation and desperation.
They didn't understand,
Tarnis said.
They thought the grove was only wood.
Now there was no one to argue with him. Bran was not among the living. They had found his body surrounded by felled strangers. His blade was in his hand. His eyes were open. Carwyn had closed them himself.
You could have done something,
Tarnis said, with aching pain and loss. His bandaged arm leaked crimson, staining his fingers. He didn't seem to notice.
You could have stopped this,
he said again, voice now raw as the wound beneath the cloth. Carwyn kneeled, placing his hand on the earth.
No, I could not have. No more than I can push the stars backward across the sky. I could only choose my place within it.
Tarnis crouched beside him.
What place is that now?
Carwyn traced a burned root with his fingers.
To carry what the memory of our people can no longer hold alone. To walk where the lines blur. To be that which holds fast to what matters in times of change. And to carry with me, into the future, what matters most.
They sat there until the wind shifted. But the land had seen them, and it remembered. Then Tarnis rose.
They'll be able to rebuild most of what we destroyed in our raids swiftly, over at the new settlement. And they're planting markers, drawing lines, and clearing forest for yet another village already too.
They will need strong backs to work their cleared fields,
Carwyn said.
and hungry mouths care little whether bread comes from round house or square, so long as it fills bellies.
His fingers brushed the scorched earth, where a beetle crawled across what had once been a hearth stone.
Our and theirs are not so different. With the right leadership and given opportunity, both these settlers and our people can knead their sweat together into the soil of next year's harvest. Eventually, the land and the Lady of the Harvest will speak to all of those whose hands tend it, and those who tend it will learn to hear,
Carwyn said.
And the forest will not forget the hands who plant and tend its sacred groves.
As he spoke, a tendril of ivy curled around a nearby stump, twitching as if testing its grip. Tarnus turned.
That sounds like a farewell, brother. Will I be seeing you again after this?
Carwyn didn't answer. He stood, stepped back into the tree shadows, and vanished between ferns and bramble. The shadows pulled at his feet like water. When he stepped into them, they clung, not to hide him, but to claim him. And Carwyn, no longer only a warrior, or a son, or a brother, or even a man, passed into legend. Chapter 8. The Grove Remembers. The girl came to the grove at dusk. She stepped between roots softened by age, her copper hair gleaming in the last light of the day, as she held a clay jar in both hands. Her braid was woven with rowan berries, and she moved like someone taught to respect silence. No one had shown her this path to the old alder grove, but she had found it all the same, drawn to it. The old grove of memory grown anew from its stumps, in years long gone by, welcomed her, not with voice, but with breath. The wind stirred in the branches, and the scent of moss and damp soil rose to fill the air. She kneeled before the great oak at the center of the alders. Its trunk was vast, its bark etched with lines that no blade had carved. She poured her offering, spring water and crushed fern fronds at its base. Then she waited. The shadows deepened. Mist crept in. A stag stepped from the trees. His arrival was silent, but the girl felt his presence instantly. She looked up into eyes that seemed to glow with their own inner light as the stag dipped its head, acknowledging her with a silent greeting. The girl placed her hand to her heart. The stag continued to stare at her until, in the silence, the girl heard it in her mind.
Do you remember?
The stag asked. The girl nodded and answered aloud.
My grandmother told me. She told me of how she met my grandfather when her tribe first arrived here, seeking refuge, and how they came to join with the tribes who had been here before.
The girl said.
And she told me of the man who gave himself to the forest, who became its guardian.
And will you carry it forward?
I will.
Then you may return,
he said.
To the forest?
She asked. No, the stag said into her mind.
To the story.
She smiled. The stag turned and disappeared again into the shadows of the forest, and the grove of memory folded its branches around her. She lingered there, listening as the alder trees whispered their remembrances until the sun had nearly set. They spoke not only of the past, but of what must be carried forward. Then, as she made her way back to the village in the dim dusk light, the singing of those reaping helped guide her home. They were singing songs honoring the harvest mother for her gift of grain, and their sickles sang with them, bright and clean against the hush of evening. The end, but not the end of Carwyn's tale. You can meet him again as a new culture once more sweeps across the British Isles, and Roman legions uproot sacred groves for the construction of Hadrian's Wall in the Edge of Empire.
Endnotes and afterward. Dear reader, I hope you've enjoyed this short journey into Bronze Age Britain, and this tale of what might have been the origin of the Celtic god Cernunnos. After all, in an infinite universe, everything is possible somewhere, right? If you'd like to meet Carwyn, as the horned god again, you'll find him in The Edge of Empire, a tale of gods, mortals and Celtic demons in Roman Britannia. Or perhaps you've heard the story already, from somewhere else. Because, nearly 3,000 years later, the trees still speak, if you know how to listen. And they show us the stories of our ancestors. The pollen and ash record, preserved in lake beds and peat bogs, tells of profound transitions in the land. It reveals how iron smelting technology spread from continental Europe circa 900 to 600 BCE. It brought with it a hunger for fuel to feed the forges that reshaped the ancient woodlands of Britain. Forests thinned, and new patterns of land use emerged. Not all in an instant, but gradually. For generations, bronze and iron coexisted, each serving different needs and traditions. At the archaeological site of All Canning's Cross in Wiltshire, the evidence of this cultural interplay is written into the soil itself. Excavations show the remains of more rectangular buildings, a shift from the classic Bronze Age roundhouse, appear alongside slag heaps from iron smelting. Yet within the same layers, bronze artifacts still persist, their designs now touched by continental influences. The old ways did not vanish overnight. Here, robust iron sickles and elegant bronze ornaments existed side by side. Bronze Age culture did not end. It was transformed in a slow, intricate alchemy of materials, customs, and beliefs. A transformation that would echo again centuries later, when new cultures from across the sea arrived. Romans, with their technologies, roads, and empire. Once more, the land was reshaped. And once more, new layers were added to the story of the Isles. But even now, for those who know how to listen, the trees still tell the story of our ancestors to us. They have transcribed these stories into the land itself, in pollen, charcoal, and peat, as well as into memory and myth. Until the next tale, Dana. I'm Dana Birkmour, and if you've just listened to this story, then you've already experienced what I believe about audiobooks. I come to audiobooks as a reader first, author second, and publisher third. As someone who writes mythic, emotionally layered fantasy, I've always believed stories are meant to be heard as much as read. Long before I published, I listened to audiobooks while commuting, running, cooking, and doing the myriad other tasks that occupied my hands and eyes, but not my mind. In audiobooks, stories take hold the way myths are meant to, through sound, rhythm, and presence. Myth especially lives well in voice, breath, cadence, the pause before meaning lands, the weight of a sentence spoken aloud. For many indie author publishers, though, traditional audiobook production has often been out of reach. The cost and logistics mean many stories, particularly backlist titles, or quieter, more atmospheric books, simply never make it to audio, despite readers asking for them. That gap has always felt like a loss, not just commercially but creatively. What excites me about spoken is the way it lowers that barrier without flattening the art. It treats audiobooks not as an afterthought or a novelty, but as a legitimate, intentional format, one that allows authors to bring more of their worlds to more readers. Not just my stories reaching listeners, but other authors' stories reaching me as well. Using spoken feels aligned with how I work as an author, thoughtful, experimental, and reader-focused. It lets me honor the oral roots of mythic storytelling, while embracing tools that help those stories travel further. That combination, ancient stories delivered in ways that fit modern lives, is exactly where I want my work to be, and where I hope to discover more fresh, compelling voices to listen to too. Because this matters to me not just as a writer, but as someone who still listens. Stories are meant to travel, and this is one more way to carry them.
Professional audiobooks in a click.